Hello, everyone, and thanks once again for joining us for Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphic showing area of red there over the western interior areas out to the coast, Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, up to the northwest coast, Noaa Valley, Kobuk Valley, Kotzebue, Selawik, down to Galena and the lower Yukon River Valley to the delta. That's a winter storm warning out for the area. Kicks in later tonight and continues through tomorrow night until early on Sunday. Taking a little more detailed look at that, it's, again, West Coast winter storm coming in and the West Coast and Western Interior. And that begins 11 p.m. Friday out along the coast and lasts through midnight Monday, actually. A little longer than I first said, through midnight Monday, Alaska Standard Time. And that's for snow accumulations of 4 to 12 inches for areas south of the Bering Strait, lower Koyukuk and middle and lower Yukon valleys. Snow accumulations of 3 to 6 inches for areas north of the Bering Strait, as well as the Kobuk and Noaa valleys. And then blizzard conditions are expected for areas along the west coast with wind gusts as high as 60 miles per hour. You can see on the right-hand side of the chart there, the NOAA could pick up 8 to 12 inches here with this storm for a storm total there. And Elam, about 6 to 8 inches, but lighter amounts to the north. By comparison, 1 to 2 inches for both Shishmaref and Buckland. Then maybe 3 to 4 inches up along the northwest coast. Ambler could see 4 to 6 inches there. And then back into the Kuskokwim Valley, even heavier amounts, McGrath 8 to 12 inches, as well as Anvuk 8 to 12 inches, and Russian Mission could see significant snows, again up to a foot possible. Otherwise, for the southern areas, or actually a winter weather advisory out for the southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta, and Bristol Bay, mostly west of Dillingham. And that's for later tonight through tomorrow for conditions, several inches of snow, blowing snow, and even possibility some freezing rain with winds gusting as high as 50 miles per hour. And from there, taking a look at satellite imagery, you can see the storm system coming across the Bering Sea, moving northeastward there with the front pushing eastward as well as to the northeast, spreading clouds onto the southwest coast, and pretty strong southerly winds in advance of that, and warmer air coming in to the Pribilofs. Front just about passing Adak currently, and then to the east there, a break, generally high pressure over the interior, but a lot of low cloudiness, snow, light snow at times throughout the day for the Fairbanks area, picking up about anywhere from quarter to an inch of snow there. Nothing really heavy, just kind of a persistent area of light snow over areas of the interior. Barter Island picked up about 1 to 2 inches along the eastern Arctic coast there, with anywhere from half an inch other areas of the Arctic coast, and maybe even into the North Slope. Low pressure continues to spin, mostly aloft, but also at the surface there off the Panhandle, starting to slide southeastward now. And that continued to spin some rain and snow showers in across the Panhandle today, with some light rain and snow down toward Ketchikan, and amounts are on the light side as well. And on the chart today, that front brought pretty gusty winds up to about 50 miles an hour at Adak, but they picked up 0.8 of an inch of precipitation in the last 12 hours ahead of that front. And that heavier rain-producing area still west of the eastern Aleutians and Pribilofs, about 1/100 of an inch falling at St. Paul, where they had winds gusting, though, up to 55 miles per hour. Nikolsky had a peak wind gust of 56 miles an hour. And then winds on the increase there, that trough enough, actually. Teller had peak wind gusts about 31 miles an hour there. That due to that trough with areas of snow showers there from the northwest coast. Across the Seward Peninsula around Kotzebue, areas of light snow. Over the southwest interior, Kuskokwim Mountains, maybe into the valley there. And then those flurries over the interior, but mainly along the eastern Alaska Range. Otherwise, mostly clear to the east and south of the Alaska Range with gusty winds up to about 35 miles an hour. Valdez. Winds diminishing, though, Kodiak Island as high-pressure ridge moves eastward. And then scattered rain and snow showers across the southeast coast today with Ketchikan and Sitka, two of the heavier precipitation amounts of about 1,500 water equivalent, so really pretty light precipitation there. That weak low off the south coast now continue to slide southeastward, and those showers will really begin to taper off overnight tonight with some increasing clearing as cold air begins to flow down from out of the Yukon there with that high sliding eastward. It's the Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, gale force northerly winds, falling temperatures, clearing skies, and those showers, snow showers tapering off, but maybe lingering throughout the night down toward Dixon Entrance, but nothing significant. And that front pushing in toward the coast late tonight, still off the coast, right about Nunivak Island around 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, with snow and blowing snow along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastline, St. Lawrence Island up to the western Seward Peninsula and the Bering Strait, with snow pushing eastward across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta to about the Kuskokwim Mountains, possibly spilling into the western Kuskokwim Valley late tonight, and some possible light snow up on the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, basically, it will be dry over the Arctic coast and north slope, central eastern interior, mostly clearing again south and east of the Alaska Range. Could see an increase in mid and high level clouds late tonight coming into Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island. Maybe a few flurries along the North Gulf Coast, but generally dry. And outlook for Saturday. Snow begins to move into Cook Inlet with thickening and lowering clouds over northern Cook Inlet, especially throughout the afternoon hours. Stays mostly clear in the Copper River Basin and the Madanuska Valley, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast. Generally clear and cold with gusty north winds over the northern Panhandle, lighter northeasterly winds down to the south, and increasing clouds, or mostly cloudy, over the central northern interior, but dry conditions in those areas, especially north slope and the Arctic coast, with snow and blowing snow. Again, pushing up to the Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, down into Unalakleet, and could even be some areas of blowing snow anywhere over the southwest interior, with possible freezing rain along the coastal areas. St. Lawrence Island, warmer temperatures, could see some brief freezing rain there, or mixed rain and snow. And rain and snow showers with much lighter winds behind the front for the Alaska Peninsula out toward the eastern Aleutians. And then some colder air coming back to the east there across the western Aleutians, dropping the snowfall levels back down to sea level for areas from about Kiska to Shemya. And for the outlook on Sunday, low pressure, that low in the Bering Sea takes a track northward there toward Wrangel Island. The front completely goes to pieces there, remnants of it, a trough there, right along the Seward Peninsula coastline, areas of light snow there with lighter winds, more westerly though, and snow showers along the Yukon Delta coast. And then the system approaching Kodiak Island, moving from south to north there, will spread snow in across much of south central Alaska, the North Gulf Coast, maybe even in the Copper River Basin. Areas of light snow west of the Alaska Range, Kuskokwim Valley, light snow or flurries, but definitely cloudy skies there. Rain and snow showers with gusty northwest winds for the Alaska Peninsula. And then that low is going to take off to the east-northeast. It won't come up to Kodiak Island. Should stay south of the North Gulf Coast Sunday night and into Monday. Next weaker system bringing some rain and snow and increasing winds to the western Aleutians. Lows tonight, teens northern Panhandle, upper 20s to near 30 to the south. Well below zero, Copper River Basin. 0 to 20 below for the Susitna Valley, Madanuska Valley, areas of the Kenai Peninsula, and around 12 for Homer. Near zero for the Kuskokwim Valley. Lower 20s for Kodiak Island, 5 to 15 for Bristol Bay. Highs tomorrow, upper 20s to lower 30s for Bristol Bay, mid-30s Kodiak Island, in the teens South Central Alaska, but into the 20s for Kachemak Bay, staying below zero in the Copper River Basin, 20s and lower 30s for the Panhandle, followed by lows again, 10 to 20 below in the Copper River Basin, but milder with more clouds and that snow coming into areas of the Susitna-Manuska Valley, Kenai Peninsula area. Of course, Cook Inlet, high or lows 20s to near 30 for Bristol Bay, down into the single numbers, 5 to 10 for the Northern Panhandle, otherwise teens. Highs in the teens, Northern Panhandle, near 30 to the south, and a little warmer Kodiak Island as well as South Central Alaska. Again, temperatures not making it in the system for the areas to the north in the Fairbanks forecast zone there. So just move out to the southwest coast. Lows tonight, upper 30s to lower 40s for the Aleutians, lower 30s for the Pribilofs. Highs 40s most areas, 38 for Shimei and Attu. Lows near freezing Sunday morning out that way for the Aleutians, near 30 for the Pribilofs. Highs 30s and 40s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. IFR with that storm out over the Bering Sea pushing eastward and arriving on the southwest coast later tonight and then pushing inland by tomorrow morning with a band now extending right into the central interior. Stays VFR south and east of the Alaska Range, including most of Bristol Bay east of Dillingham and Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast Panhandle. And for the afternoon, IFR pushing farther eastward. We lose the IFR band there in the central interior, but marginal VFR in the increased western Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, and some IFR now sliding into western Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay IFR, and then IFR across much of the Seward Peninsula and the upslope areas of the western Alaska Range there. VFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast and improving out over the Bering Sea with some areas of VFR showing up farther to the west. Stays pretty nice flying weather-wise for the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast. Then on Sunday morning, storminess pushes IFR eastward, making a pretty good jog to the east, at least into western Prince William Sound by morning, and up to the southern slopes of the central Alaska Range. Marginal VFR starting to invade the western Copper River Basin, as well as another band along the North Gulf Coast. Stays VFR for the Panhandle and eastern interior, north slope to the Arctic coast VFR. And for Sunday afternoon, IFR covering much of southern Alaska now from east of Yakutat all the way down to Bristol Bay to Dillingham and northward there through the west central interior to the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. North of the mountains up there, VFR again for the Arctic coast, north slope areas. Big area of VFR now breaking out over the central Bering Sea, including St. Matthew Island, St. Paul, St. George, Adak and Atka, and Nikolsky. With the next round of IFR just showing up way out to the west there around Shimei and Attu. Panhandle staying VFR for the entire weekend. And north of the Alaska Range, not too bad. VFR Sunday afternoon up across the Yukon Flats, North Slope Arctic Coast again. And for your Anatuvik and Adigan, another VFR day coming up on Saturday. For Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, but conditions trending toward marginal VFR, especially on the western entrances throughout the afternoon hours. And rainy, same trend, VFR, probably into the early afternoon, but later in the afternoon, watch for marginal VFR conditions on the western approach. And windy, stays VFR the entire day Saturday. Isabel, same forecast, good VFR again for Saturday. And Mentesta, VFR tomorrow. Tanita, VFR. Portage, VFR, either approach. And Chilkoot and White, VFR. And moving on to the freezing levels, we've got southerly flow out there over the Bering Sea ahead of that front, slow-moving front eastward there. So we've got the surface all the way up almost to St. Lawrence Island by Saturday morning, 2,000 feet, right around St. Paul. And for Unalaska, 32 degrees will occur at about 6,000 feet. Nikolsky, closer to 8,000 feet. but still the Panhandle pretty much below freezing, as well as obviously the interior as well. And for icing, we've got some considerable moderate rime icing pushing inland later tonight into Saturday afternoon along the western interior there, with about 5,000 to 14,000 feet down over the Alaska Peninsula, roughly 2,000 to 10,000 feet or so up there to the northern areas. Otherwise, central eastern interior staying icing free, and icing free for the most part out over the Aleutians. Nothing too significant expected out there, or the Panhandle. Looking at the jet stream, westerly flow coming over the top of high pressure well south of Kodiak Island, 145 southwesterly winds there north of Atka, turn westerly 155 knots there just east of the Yukon River across the Yukon Valley, and then diving southeastward there, mostly off the southeast coast. 9,000 foot winds, 45 to 50 knot winds around that low west of Gamble, and 50 knot westerlies south-southwest of the low over the western Aleutians. Pretty light winds over the eastern interior, Arctic coast, North Slope, and the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, south winds, 50 to 55 knots there, Norton Sound up along the northwest coast, light over the eastern interior areas, and northwest 45 to 50 knots coming across the northern Bering Sea. Turbulence, widespread, considerable moderate turbulence there from the western Brooks Range northwest coast southward across the Kuskokwim Valley, really all of the western interior to Kodiak Island.
Plastic marine debris so common? We know there's trash in the ocean. Unfortunately, a lot of it is plastic. We find plastic everywhere, from the ocean floor to surface. The plastics are all shapes and sizes and all different types. We find plastics on beaches and also inside animals' stomachs or wrapped around their bodies. That's bad news for our ocean and the animals that live in it and near it. It's also bad news for us. A recent study from the University of Georgia estimated that 8 million metric tons of plastic trash enters the ocean every year. That's like putting 5 bags filled with plastic on every foot of coastline in the world. That's a lot of plastic in the ocean, and it's there because, well, we put it there. The 5 most common items found during the International Coastal Cleanup are plastic cigarette butts, food wrappers, plastic beverage bottles, plastic bottle caps, and plastic straws and drink stirrers. Notice anything in common with those? It's a lot of single-use, disposable plastic. It goes without saying, we produce too much waste. That waste ends up in the ocean when we litter or don't recycle. Plastic is an important part of our modern lives. We use it for a lot of good things, but we need to take responsibility for how much we use every day and where it goes when we're done with it. The 3 R's can help, and it's up to every single one of us to practice them. Reduce your use of disposable plastic. That's anything you use once and throw away. Just use less. Reuse disposable plastics when possible. A plastic bottle makes a great coin piggy bank or watering can. The possibilities are endless. Recycle anything that can be recycled so it stays out of landfills where trash can blow away. Ocean plastic is a huge problem that's only going to get worse. Unless we change our ways, we can do better for the ocean and for us. Why is plastic marine debris so common? We know there's trash in the ocean. Unfortunately, a lot of it is plastic. We find plastic everywhere, from the ocean floor to surface. The plastics are all shapes and sizes and all different types. We find plastics on beaches and also inside animals' stomachs or wrapped around their bodies. That's bad news for our ocean and the animals that live in it and near it. It's also bad news for us. A recent study from the University of Georgia estimated that 8 million metric tons of plastic trash enters the ocean every year. That's like putting 5 bags filled with plastic on every foot of coastline in the world. That's a lot of plastic in the ocean, and it's there because, well, we put it there. The 5 most common items found during the International Coastal Cleanup are plastic cigarette butts, food wrappers, plastic beverage bottles, plastic bottle caps, and plastic straws and drink stirrers. Notice anything in common with those? It's a lot of single-use, disposable plastic. It goes without saying, we produce too much waste. That waste ends up in the ocean when we litter or don't recycle. Plastic is an important part of our modern lives. We use it for a lot of good things, but we need to take responsibility for how much we use every day and where it goes when we're done with it. The 3 R's can help, and it's up to every single one of us to practice them. Reduce your use of disposable plastic. That's anything you use once and throw away. Just use less. Reuse disposable plastics when possible. A plastic bottle makes a great coin piggy bank or watering can. The possibilities are endless. Recycle anything that can be recycled so it stays out of landfills where trash can blow away. Ocean plastic is a huge problem that's only going to get worse. Unless we change our ways, we can do better for the ocean and for us.
What is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Well, first, let's talk about what it's not. It's not a floating island of trash like a garbage dump or a landfill. It's also not the only patch. They exist all throughout the ocean, and the Pacific Garbage Patch just happens to be the most famous. Garbage patches are large areas of marine debris concentration that are formed by rotating ocean currents called gyres, kind of like big whirlpools that suck things in. A garbage patch is made up of tiny plastic pieces called microplastics that are less than 5 millimeters long. It's more like pepper flakes swirling in a soup than something you can skim off the surface. You might come across some larger items like plastic bottles, but it's possible to sail through a garbage patch and not see anything. And they're a big problem for the ocean and us. People often ask why we can't just scoop up all the marine debris in the ocean. And the answer is, unfortunately, it's just not that simple. The first challenge is the sheer size of these garbage patches. They're huge. They're constantly moving with ocean currents. And there's debris from the ocean surface all the way down to the sea floor. Not to mention all the marine life we would disrupt if we tried to just scoop up debris. So what can we do? Well, the ultimate solution is prevention. And we need to keep that as our highest priority. We can reduce, reuse, and recycle to keep trash out of the ocean in the first place. And we can participate in things like shoreline cleanups. It's a lot easier to deal with debris before it gets to the ocean. Because until we stop marine debris at the source, we'll just be cleaning it up forever.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle. North to northwest winds on Saturday, 25 to 30 knots on the north coast. Northeasterlies at 30 knots. And with high pressure building over the Yukon, look for gale force northerlies at 40 knots for Lynn Canal. Gale warnings also for Stevens Passage. Northeast winds 35 knots and Clarence Strait. Northwest winds at 25 knots. And for the day Sunday, gale warnings for the north coast, east 35 knots. Small craft advisories for the south coast for southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for Lynn Canal continue. North winds 35 knots, 30 knot northerlies for Stevens Passage, and 20 knots out of the north for Clarence Strait with 4-foot seas. For Prince William Sound, north winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Eastern North Gulf Coast, north winds 25 knots with gale force gust of 40 knots, seas at about 6 feet. North 20-knot winds for the western North Gulf Coast, Barren Islands. Winds will be northwesterly at 20 knots. And then northeast winds 25 knots for Kamishak Bay, Cook Inlet. Northeast winds 10 to 20 knots with 2 to 5 foot seas. For Sunday, big increase in the wind, especially south of the Forelands for Cook Inlet. Northeast winds 40 knots. Gale warnings also for Kamishak Bay. Northeast winds 35 knots. Northern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories. North winds 25 knots. And northeast winds at 30 knots for Prince William Sound. And the North Gulf Coast, gale warnings. East-northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. Seas up around 16 to 17 feet. And the Barren Islands will be seeing east winds at 40 knots with 16-foot seas. Kodiak Island, small craft advisories for the day Saturday. For west winds 25 to 30 knots. Alaska Peninsula gale warning, south winds 35 to 40 knots. Bristol Bay, southeast winds increasing to 35 knots, seas building to 6 feet. And for Sunday, Bristol Bay, gale force northerlies 45 knots, and the Alaska Peninsula storm warnings, north to northwest winds 45 to 50 knots. Kodiak Island, northeast to southeast winds at 30 knots, seas 13 feet. Eastern Aleutians, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Central Aleutians, westerlies at 25 to 30 knots. And for the western Aleutians, west-northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Sunday, gale warnings for the western Aleutians from Shimei to Kiska south 45 knots. Amchitka Island, southwest winds 45 knots. Adak and Atka, winds will be west at 40 to 45 knots with 11 to 15-foot seas. And gale warnings for the eastern Aleutians, northwest winds 30 to 40 knots with 11 to 13-foot seas. Pribilof Islands on Saturday, southwest winds at 30 knots, but gale warnings for the southwest coast. South winds 40 to 45 knots. Southeast winds 40 knots, St. Lawrence Island. Gale warning for Norton Sound. Southeast winds 35 knots. And west winds of 40 knots for St. Matthew Island. For the day Sunday, St. Lawrence Island will see westerly winds 35 knots. Same thing for St. Matthew Island. Seas running 17 to 21 feet. Small craft advisories for the Yukon Delta coast. West winds at 25 knots. But gale warnings continue for the Kuskokwim Delta coast out of the northwest at 40 knots. Pribilofs northwest 25 and Norton Sound south winds at 20 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, basically south winds at about 10, south 15 on the central coast, southeast at 15 for the west side. Then gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea, east winds 35 knots. And for Sunday, gale warnings continue for the Chukchi Sea, southeast 35 knots, western Arctic coast, east-southeast at 30, central coast, east winds 30 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 25 knots. For tonight, strong front brings blowing snow and maybe even some freezing rain along the southwest coast. Later tonight, snow pushing inland to the Kuskokwim Valley or just past the Kuskokwim Mountains by morning tomorrow and into Bristol Bay. Otherwise, clear and cold or mostly clear, Copper River Basin. Partly to mostly cloudy over the central northern interior to the Arctic coast, but dry conditions and winds light. Winds on the increase for the Panhandle there, especially in the north, as snow showers taper off down to the south. And then for tomorrow, winter storm warnings for the western interior with snow and blowing snow, possibly blizzard conditions, and snow southern Alaska on Sunday, dry to the north.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.